Tensions in the Caribbean are flaring once again. Venezuela reacted sharply after the United States launched a deadly strike on a vessel accused of carrying narcotics, sending fighter jets over a U.S. warship on patrol. This episode marks a new chapter in the long-running feud between Washington and Caracas. The retaliatory move, involving the deployment of two armed F-16 fighter jets over the USS Jason Dunham, a U.S. destroyer on patrol, immediately drew global attention. The United States was quick to respond, bolstering its military presence in the region by sending 10 F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico, a clear signal that escalation would be met with overwhelming force. The incident stemmed from a U.S. airstrike on a speedboat allegedly used by an international drug trafficking network. The attack killed 11 people on board. Washington claimed the vessel had departed from Venezuela and was operated by an organization long listed as a narco-terrorist group. The U.S. action quickly provoked Caracas. As a show of force, two Venezuelan Air Force F-16s conducted a low-altitude flyover above the USS Jason Dunham, an Aegis-guided missile destroyer conducting counter-narcotics patrols. The Pentagon denounced the maneuver as a dangerous provocation. In a statement on X, U.S. officials described Venezuela's move as designed to disrupt legitimate counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism operations. Washington also warned what it called the cartel controlling Venezuela not to interfere with its mission. The tension goes beyond naval patrols. At its core, the feud has been rooted in Washington's branding of Nicolas Maduro's regime as a sponsor of international drug trafficking. Since early August, President Donald Trump has frozen Venezuela's overseas assets. Not stopping there, Trump also announced a $50 million bounty for anyone who could bring Maduro to justice. He labeled Maduro a world-class drug trafficker, and vowed the U.S. would not allow Venezuelan cocaine to flood American black markets. Maduro, in turn, deployed more than 15,000 troops to the Colombian border. There is no way for them to enter Venezuela, he declared confidently, sending a clear message that Caracas was ready to defend its sovereignty with military might. For the Pentagon, Venezuela's actions were simply part of a long-standing pattern, using military force to shield drug trafficking networks. Washington has insisted its Caribbean operations are directly aimed at dismantling supply routes allegedly tied to top Venezuelan officials. Tensions are heightened by the fact that since 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice has indicted Maduro and 14 senior officials on charges of narco-terrorism, money laundering, and corruption. Washington accused them of conspiring with FARC guerrillas to ship tons of cocaine into the United States. The scandal, known as the Cartel of the Suns, is believed to be run by elements within the Venezuelan military. A $15 million reward has already been offered for information leading to Maduro's capture. Maduro has repeatedly denied the allegations, accusing Washington of manufacturing excuses to intervene in Venezuela and plunder its oil wealth. He has echoed this rhetoric in his frequent national television addresses. But the reality on the ground tells a different story. Cocaine flows from Latin America to the U.S. continue to rise, and intelligence reports consistently identify Venezuela as a key transit hub. This, Washington argues, is the very reason for its military operations in the Caribbean. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reinforced this narrative on Tuesday, declaring that the strike on the drug vessel was lawful. Today, U.S. military forces conducted a lethal strike in the southern Caribbean against a drug boat. Departing from Venezuela, he wrote on X. Rubio added that the boat was operated by a group long designated as a narco-terrorist organization. From Washington's perspective, the strike was not only lawful but part of the global war on terror. The deployment of 10 F-35s to Puerto Rico further escalated tensions. The move was interpreted as a stark warning to Maduro that Washington was prepared to unleash its full military might if provocations continued. Military sources stressed that the F-35 deployment was not symbolic. The fifth-generation jets are capable of precision strikes and air defense missions, signaling that Washington has options ranging from deterrence to decisive action. In Caracas, state media portrayed U.S. actions as outright aggression, accusing Washington of seeking to provoke war in an already unstable region. Maduro, in a fiery speech, accused Trump of engineering a regional crisis for domestic political gain. "This is not about drugs, it's about power," he declared. Analysts, however, believe the reality is a mixture of both politics and narcotics. With elections looming, Trump is eager to project toughness against international cartels, while Maduro seeks to preserve his grip on power by stoking anti-U.S. sentiment. The Caribbean has thus become a stage for competing spheres of influence. The presence of warships, fighter jets, and heavily armed troops shows how quickly tensions could spiral into open confrontation. Still, observers warn that further escalation would only deepen the suffering of the Venezuelan people. The country is already mired in economic collapse and humanitarian crisis, with millions fleeing to neighboring states. American sanctions are tightening the squeeze. Assets have been frozen, oil trade restricted, and international access choked off, worsening Venezuela's domestic turmoil. In Washington, Trump's approach has been praised by some as a tough stand against narcotics. But critics argue the strategy risks dragging the U.S. into another unwinnable military conflict. Meanwhile, Latin American nations are on alert. Colombia, Brazil, and other Caribbean states fear the crisis could destabilize the entire region. Diplomats have called for the United Nations to intervene before open warfare erupts. Yet so far, mediation has shown little progress. The situation feels like déjà vu for Latin America, a region long marked by interventions and power struggles. From the Cold War to the present, the shadow of foreign involvement looms large. Washington, however, appears resolute. Trump has made Maduro a prime target, and with military assets closing in, the prospect of wider strikes remains on the table. For ordinary Venezuelans, this is yet another chapter in an endless crisis. Caught between political ambitions, drug wars, and military maneuvers, they remain powerless. The F-35s in Puerto Rico, destroyers in the Caribbean, and troops on the Colombian border add to the specter of war, while hopes for peace grow ever dimmer. If left unchecked, the crisis could engulf not just Venezuela and the US, but the stability of the wider region, and even global relations. From an editorial perspective, this crisis underscores the fragility of geopolitical balance in Latin America. When economies collapse, narcotics fuel conflict, and political ambitions cloak themselves in lofty rhetoric, tensions are bound to explode. Washington may claim legitimacy in fighting drugs, while Caracas hides behind the banner of sovereignty. Yet, as always, the greatest casualties are the powerless, ordinary people yearning for a semblance of normalcy in their homeland. The world must beware. The Caribbean could become the next flashpoint of global instability unless diplomacy replaces the dominance of arms. From an editorial standpoint, the standoff between Washington and Caracas is not simply about maritime patrols or the drug war. It reflects the broader reality of geopolitics, where major powers often wield security as a tool for influence, while embattled regimes invoke sovereignty as a shield. The United States seeks to show the world it will act decisively against what it deems a global threat, while Nicolas Maduro tries to frame Venezuela as the victim of imperialist aggression. But lost in this clash of narratives is the fate of the people. For years, Venezuelans have endured economic collapse, hyperinflation, and mass migration. Now, the looming shadow of military escalation adds yet another burden. Every fighter jet in the skies, every destroyer at sea, pushes the dream of peace further out of reach. The international community cannot remain a passive spectator. Diplomacy must be pursued with urgency, not just to ease tensions in the short term, but to address the roots of the crisis: narcotics trafficking, political deadlock, and economic collapse. Without that, escalation will remain a vicious cycle, enriching the elites while leaving ordinary citizens to suffer. Latin America's history is already scarred by interventions, coups, and wars. The world cannot afford to let the Caribbean become the stage for yet another tragic repeat. In the end, military might can rattle sabers, but only diplomacy and dialogue can offer the Venezuelan people a glimmer of a better future.